And today I am joined by Professor Dave Peterson with Iowa State University. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking a little bit about public perception today. We are less than 2 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses. What do you think the general consensus is among Iowans right now?
So amongst Iowa Republicans in particular, I think the easy consensus is that this is Donald Trump's race to lose. He is the clear front runner in this, and given as much as we know about Donald Trump already, I'm not sure what revelation or what new thing we could learn that would change many people's minds about him.
Well, looking at some of that perception right now, let's look at a Morning Consult poll, which has Donald Trump at 66%, Nikki Haley and DeSantis both at 11%, then Vivek Ramaswamy at 6%, Chris Christie at 4%, and then Asa Hutchinson at 1%. Donald Trump is polling so far in advance. Tell me a little bit about these polls, because I think we need to look at what goes into these polls and how much can we rely on them.
Right. So the polling has been pretty consistent this cycle, right? So there's lots of different pollsters doing lots of different types of polls, drawing their samples a little bit different, asking their questions a little bit different. But overall, there's a clear trend of Donald Trump with a tremendous lead. The 66% of Morning Consult that you quoted was on the high end, particularly in Iowa. But it's pretty clear he's substantially in the lead. And like I said, pollsters all do this slightly differently, right? So some pollsters still do the traditional phone calling, right? They'll get the list of registered voters and try to contact them via the phone, and that's the sort of tried and true method. But with people not answering their phone quite as often anymore, it's breaking down a little bit. Other pollsters have developed other techniques where you get a group of people, a large group of people who are willing to take polls online for you for some small compensation. And the pollsters do their best to build a broad and representative database of folks who are doing this, and then sort of after the fact, use some statistical techniques to try to make it balanced, to make it a little bit more representative. The key thing is no single poll is going to be perfect, right? There's going to be some noise. Every pollster does it slightly differently in how they approach it. And so as a result, they're going to get slightly different answers. The key thing to look for is this trend, right? Is this sort of what's the commonality? And the idea of Donald Trump being in the sizable lead with DeSantis and Haley sort of essentially tied is the overall pattern. And then your Ramaswamy, your Christie, your Hutchinson, they're still a step back from them. That seems to be the overall pattern.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper because when I think about polling, I think about, stopping people on the street and asking people, who are you going to vote for? And I do that for my job just a little more publicly. So I'll, ask people. And I feel like a lot of moderates don't want to respond yet. I feel like a lot of moderates are kind of aren't eager to answer. But if you are clearly on the left or clearly on the right, you know who you're going to vote for. You know how to answer that question. So do you feel like these polls are getting those moderates in there? Because that was kind of an issue with the 2016 election.
No, sure. That's a great question. And one of the things is that the pollsters aren't just sort of randomly stopping people or even doing this sort of random digit dialing, which is what we used to sort of do back in the day when area codes were meaningful, right? You would just, randomly type in some numbers and you'd get who you'd get. But that's not how it's done anymore. And instead, there's a database, right? So in the state of Iowa, for instance, the Iowa Secretary of State has a list of every registered voter in the state, right? And if you're registered as a partisan, right, that's known as well. And so it's not just sort of randomly contacting people. We know who the potential people are. That's a public record. And so we can know who, based on, say, the party registration, we can know who's answering and who's not answering. And so if it's that sort of phone calling method, then, right, we can use that to try to figure out, well, we're not getting enough responses from independents who might caucus, or we're not getting enough responses from, younger voters, or whatever the group is. If it's the internet-based sampling technique, one of the advantages of that is people take repeated surveys over time, over a long period of time. And these companies can track who's answering, right? So we know not just, right? So when a company is going to do a poll, they'll send out an email solicitation to a set of folks who meet the parameters of what they're looking for, right? So it would be like Iowans, particularly Iowa Republicans or Iowa Independents, if we're thinking about the caucuses. And we know their history of responding, right? So your idea of, moderates or independents might be less likely to answer polls is true. But we know that, and we know the probability of that, and we know how it shifts, right? So one of the things that happens in a lot of polling is in the general election after a debate, we often see a bump in the poll for whoever's presumed to do better. But with these internet polls, where we're polling people multiple times, we can know, are people changing their mind, or are people changing their willingness to take the survey, right? And so in the general election after the debates, what ends up happening is if it's a good debate for the Democrats are more likely to take the poll, and the Republicans are less likely to take the poll, and vice versa if it's a good one for the Republicans. In this cycle, for the Iowa caucuses, we know people's previous answers, right? So we know, if I surveyed you last month, I know who you said, and so I can know, are you less likely to answer the poll next time based on who you supported last time? And there doesn't seem to be much evidence that that's the case, at least not yet.